You can just use SharePoint to go against this stuff and not have a client. But really, what's interesting is that Microsoft made a quite conscious decision a while back. They don't have a client for SQL Server, do they? Right? There's no specific client to connect into SQL Server and look at stuff, and that's really sad, especially considering some of the stuff into analysis services. What they do have is Excel, and they've decided we're just going to let Excel be that client. And they've added features over the last couple of releases that are pretty compelling to connect back into analysis services and start to expose some of that power. Has anybody here played with the data mining tools for Excel? That's it. It's the most misunderstood product out there. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, so I'll leave that alone.
That's why I did this.
Yeah.
I know he played with me.
Yeah.
Even today, you have Visio now too.
Yeah, Visio, and I mentioned that a bit, but you're absolutely right. You even had Visio with Performance Point in 2007, but boy, that was even more fun to get going. So here's what the platform looks like from this standpoint. At the back end, we've got, of course, our real BI engine, right? SQL Server, and that's always going to be our big organizational engine. That's giving us basically these products. And again, what I find an awful lot of people don't know is they already own this stuff, right? With the exception of SQL Express, you get analysis services, a full-on OLAP engine. Reporting services, that's your Crystal competitor. Very, very solid product, especially with SQL Server 2008 R2. 2005 might have been a different story. Integration services. Killer product if you've never played with it, right? If you want to move data from one place to another and do it like that, integration service, and it doesn't just have to be for BI. It's pretty cool stuff. The data mining. The data mining is built into analysis services. So I asked you if you'd use the data mining extensions for Excel, and what Excel does is reach back into that engine and to apply these data mining models. Data mining is simply take a great big set of data and try and build either a mathematical equation around it, so I can use it for prediction purposes. What are my 50 most likely customers to buy these shoes based on their previous purchasing patterns? Would be a question to ask of a mining model. Or which one of these things is not like the other, like clustering algorithms. If you've ever tried to buy gas 3 times in a day and go to pay for it and get that phone call that your credit card's been shut off, you're the victim of a data mining moment. And of course, data warehousing, and that's just simply the relational engine that exists in SQL, right? A data warehouse is no different than a transactional database. It's just the way it's designed. It could be on the same server. There's nothing magical about that. So what's in SharePoint? And I'm speaking of 2010, obviously. First and foremost, SharePoint is our visualization layer, right? Through a browser, we can get access to all that magic that's happening on the back end if someone designs it properly, okay? Excel services is a big one, and it's better in 2010. But given that Excel is still that client that people want to use, let them use it. But let's let them use it in a controlled fashion. Just drop down here. Let's publish out data connections to our back-end databases that are safe and secure and people don't necessarily get to see the credentials for. But let them use those data connections to connect to that data. Okay? That's how that works. Anybody know about the chart web part in 2010? Anybody used it? Well, you'll see it here in just a second. It's cute. Anybody use Dundas tools? It's Dundas tools. That's what it is. They just embedded it in 2010. You need Enterprise to use it, but you can connect to some SharePoint data and do some quick little visualizations. That'll be our first demo today. KPIs, just the same way as they were. That hasn't really changed much. But what's really interesting is the inclusion of Performance Point. Performance Point is all about analytical reporting. So we can quickly do analytical charts. So what used to be ProClarity, that's baked into Performance Point now. It's not a separate product. So you'll get what's in Performance Point. You'll get all kinds of reporting, but the magic pieces are analytical chart and analytical grid, and they're designed to work against multi-dimensional back-end systems that allow you to pivot in real time in a browser. Okay. The other really, there's more to SharePoint. I'm selling it short, Performance Point. I'm selling it short. There is also what used to be way back when Business Scorecard Manager, and that's made it through until today. And a Business Scorecard Manager is just basically a way to, instead of just having KPIs that you can put on a page, it lets you take KPIs, logically organize them, and roll them up. So how is my business doing at this level? It's yellow. Why is it yellow? I click yellow, I see a whole bunch of more KPIs. And KPIs, and I should mention this, key performance indicators. And it's a way for the business to say, here's where we think things should be at. Here's where we think things should, we'd like things to be at. Where are they, and how does that shape up with respect to these goals? And you'll get typically indicators: green, yellow, red. It's whatever that may be. Gauges, whatever they are. But it's basically a way to snapshot on a page how the whole business is doing. You can even apply them, as Bill was mentioning, Visio services. I can create a Visio diagram and attach shapes in a Visio diagram back to KPIs. So that this particular shape might be green because things are going well. Think of that in a manufacturing situation. My tank gets too low, whatever that may be, it's red. Okay? That sort of thing. I've done that to death. Reporting services integration. As before, we can now take reporting services reports and connections and publish them right into SharePoint. Why do we want to do that? Well, it's a single infrastructure. It's much easier to deploy. It's much easier for the end users to work with, and we get to use that nice SharePoint check-in, check-out, version control, all that wonderful stuff with all of the reporting services constructs. And stay tuned to some good stuff that's coming in the fall with that too. Line of business integration. BCS. We've all heard of BCS. That's the ability, of course, BDC in 2007, right? And that's the ability to connect into back-end systems and expose that data now in read-write, now with read-write, back into SharePoint. Well, that's certainly a BI feature, and we can use some of these tools against that sort of information. I already touched on Visio services. And finally, Power Pivot for SharePoint. Power Pivot's an extremely powerful way of getting data into Excel and being able to do multidimensional analysis on it. What we need to be able to do is to push that back up. If we want to do it in a controlled fashion, we want to be able to push those spreadsheets back up into SharePoint and use Excel services to get at those analyses. But because there's a different engine in behind the scenes with Power Pivot, we need to have Power Pivot for SharePoint. And how do you install Power Pivot for SharePoint? With analysis services. It's a part of it. It's a way to install analysis services. So you put a piece of analysis services on a SharePoint front-end server or multiple SharePoint front-end servers, and you use it that way. What's that tell you about what's in behind Power Pivot, right? It's client-side multidimensional analysis. Okay, done that to death. Probably getting going too slow here. Mm-hmm.
So this may be a crazy question. Power Pivot for SharePoint, does that mean you could Power Pivot this? No.
Yes, sort of, kind of. You wouldn't though. Yeah. Power Pivot for SharePoint, what all that really allows you to do. So if I'm using Excel and then I use Power Pivot to do an analysis, I now have because Power Pivot isn't really Excel, right? Right. It's an add-in to Excel, but there's a different engine underneath, right? So if I have a spreadsheet that's using Power Pivot, I basically got data in a format that Excel services won't on its own recognize.
So I think, okay, so I just want to make sure I understand here. So the idea between Power Pivot with SharePoint is that your data is stored in one place. Mm-hmm. And so people may have Power Pivot or do things like that, but they're not having multiple copies of the data. Okay.
Same argument as with Excel services. This basically, all Power Pivot with SharePoint for Excel. I'm on the next slide. All Power Pivot for SharePoint does is allow me to publish those Power Pivot enabled spreadsheets into SharePoint and use Excel services with them. Right? So all that power of Excel services. So finally, Office, right? Big deal, right? Self-service access and insight, Excel. I can connect into the back system, and I can match things up how I want to. Data exploration, predictive analysis. Those are the tools I was talking about before. Data visualization. Excel's got some nice data visualization. I might as well use it, right? And finally, Power Pivot for Excel, which we'll hopefully get to a demo of real quickly before. But for those who don't know, Power Pivot is a way, really quickly, to get at back-end data that you may or may not be organizational, pull it all together in a single place, and start to do those complex analyses. So I'm able to take a piece of data from our corporate system, be able to get something from Azure Data Services, take something out here from a web service, pull it all together, and start to basically tell it what the relationships are if it can't figure it out already, and it often can, and start to build these complex analyses. Okay?